An ordinary flight from New York to Florida turns into an unexpected confrontation, challenging not just patience but personal beliefs. Watch as a moment of tension unfolds, testing respect and fairness. How would you react? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories. The cabin of the flight from New York to Florida buzzed with the subdued energy of passengers settling into their seats. Among them was Officer Jeremy, an African-American man whose weary frame carried the evidence of a long day's work. His hopes for a quiet flight were abruptly interrupted as he approached his assigned seat in the premium class, only to find it occupied by another passenger. Jeremy paused, studying the man in his seat, and politely said, "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat." The man glanced at him briefly, then returned to fiddling with his phone, making no effort to move. Jeremy straightened up, his tone firm but calm, as he reiterated, "I'm sorry, but I need you to vacate this seat. I have a ticket." The other passenger barely looked up before shrugging indifferently. Jeremy was about to press further when a flight attendant approached. Her badge read Catherine, and her professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she surveyed the situation. "Is there a problem here?" Catherine asked, her voice clipped. "Yes," Jeremy replied, holding up his ticket. "This is my seat, but it seems there's been some confusion." Catherine's gaze flicked between Jeremy and the seated passenger before landing on Jeremy with a dismissive air. "I'm sorry, sir, but all the seats in premium class are occupied. I'll need you to relocate." Jeremy frowned, taken aback by her abruptness. "Relocate? I have a confirmed ticket for this seat. Why should I move?" Her demeanor shifted, her polite mask slipping just enough to reveal irritation. "I don't have time to debate this with you. Please cooperate and take a seat in the economy section." Jeremy's posture stiffened. He had faced countless subtle and overt acts of discrimination in his life, and this moment carried that all too familiar sting. "I don't think you understand. I paid for this seat, and I'm entitled to it. Could you check the seating arrangements again?" Catherine exhaled sharply, her irritation now palpable. "Sir, let me be clear. All the premium seats are full. If you're unhappy, you can step off the plane and discuss this with the ticketing agent." Jeremy felt his patience thinning. "This is unacceptable. I expect to be treated with the same respect as any other passenger. Could you please address this properly?" Catherine's eyes narrowed and her tone turned condescending. "Look, you're just an officer. Why are you making this a bigger deal than it needs to be?" The words hit Jeremy like a slap, but he maintained his composure. Around them, nearby passengers began to notice the interaction, their murmurs adding a layer of tension to the air. One passenger leaned toward the aisle, clearly perturbed. "Excuse me, but this gentleman seems to have a valid point. Why isn't this being handled fairly?" Catherine shot the man a tight smile and gestured for him to stay out of it. Jeremy took a deep breath, reminding himself of the importance of keeping calm. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm simply requesting what I'm entitled to." Catherine crossed her arms, her professional demeanor crumbling further. "I already explained the situation. Either you sit in economy, or you leave the plane." Before Jeremy could respond, another voice from the nearby row rang out, louder this time. "This is wrong. You wouldn't be treating him like this if he wasn't black." The cabin fell silent, and Catherine's face froze. The murmurs of discontent grew louder as more passengers chimed in, voicing their support for Jeremy. A young woman stood up and pointed at Catherine. "This isn't just rude, it's discriminatory. Why are you targeting him?" Catherine's lips tightened, and she glanced around the cabin, her authority visibly slipping away. "Everyone, please remain calm. We're handling the matter." "No, you're not," another passenger interjected. "He paid for that seat, and you're trying to humiliate him." Jeremy stood there, trying to maintain his composure while the situation escalated. More passengers began recording the incident on their phones, their voices growing louder in support of Jeremy. Catherine's attempts to regain control only seemed to fuel the crowd's anger. "I just want what I paid for," Jeremy said, his voice steady but firm. Catherine's irritation turned to unease as she realized the situation was spiraling out of control. She gestured for Jeremy to follow her toward the crew area, away from the eyes and ears of the other passengers. Reluctantly, Jeremy followed, his heart heavy with frustration. He had hoped for a peaceful flight, but now he was caught in a storm of prejudice and resistance. As they moved out of sight, the passengers continued their heated discussions, many expressing outrage over what they had just witnessed. The confrontation had only just begun, but Jeremy knew this was a battle he couldn't afford to back down from. The tension in the cabin grew palpable as Jeremy followed Catherine toward the crew area. The muffled murmurs of the passengers still reached his ears, many expressing their disapproval of how he was being treated. Jeremy, maintaining his composure, turned to Catherine and said firmly, "I have a ticket for that seat, and I expect to be treated fairly. Your behavior in front of the other passengers was unacceptable." Catherine spun around, her irritation now fully on display. "Listen, sir, I'm doing my job. You're the one making this situation more complicated than it needs to be." Jeremy's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Doing your job doesn't involve disrespecting paying passengers or making discriminatory remarks. This isn't just about me. It's about fairness." Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the passengers weren't letting the issue die down. A young woman, who had already voiced her support for Jeremy earlier, stood up and addressed the other passengers. "This is completely unacceptable. He's being treated differently because of his race, and we all know it." A middle-aged man nodded and added, "I've flown premium class before, and I've never seen a flight attendant handle a situation like this. This is clearly personal." The murmurs grew louder, and some passengers began demanding to speak to the captain. Others held their phones high, recording the scene, while a few tried to call out to Jeremy, encouraging him not to back down. In the crew area, Catherine seemed to falter under Jeremy's steady gaze. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she snapped. "The situation is what it is. If you have a problem, you can address it with the airline after the flight." Jeremy stepped closer, his tone unwavering. "That's not good enough. You're representing this airline, and your behavior reflects on them. I'm not going to let this slide." Catherine hesitated, clearly realizing that her usual tactics weren't working on him. Her gaze darted toward the cabin, where the voices of the passengers were growing louder. "If you don't like how I'm handling this, you're welcome to leave the plane," she said sharply, though her voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "I'm not going anywhere," Jeremy replied firmly. "I have a right to be here, just like anyone else in that cabin." The tension between them was broken by a loud knock on the door to the crew area. A co-pilot stepped in, his expression serious. "What's going on here? The passengers are demanding answers and the captain wants an explanation." Catherine tried to compose herself. "It's just a misunderstanding. I'm handling it." The co-pilot raised an eyebrow. "Handling it?" Half the cabin is in uproar and people are recording videos that are probably already online. This doesn't look like it's being handled. Jeremy took the opportunity to speak. All I want is to sit in the seat I paid for. This should have been resolved a long time ago." The co-pilot studied both of them before nodding. "Let's get this sorted. Catherine, check his ticket and confirm the seat assignment. We need to de-escalate this before it gets worse." Reluctantly, Catherine pulled out her tablet and scanned Jeremy's ticket. Her lips tightened as the seat number confirmed what Jeremy had been saying all along. Without a word, she stormed back into the cabin. The murmurs quieted as the passengers watched Catherine approach the man who had taken Jeremy's seat. She exchanged a few terse words with him before the man reluctantly gathered his belongings and moved to the economy section. Jeremy walked back to his seat, the eyes of the passengers following him. A smattering of applause broke out, and the young woman who had spoken up earlier called out, "Good for you. Don't let anyone push you round." Catherine returned to the crew area, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The co-pilot, who had followed Jeremy back to the cabin, addressed the passengers. "We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience. We'll be taking off shortly." As Jeremy settled into his seat, he couldn't help but reflect on the ordeal. The support of the passengers had been heartening, but the blatant disrespect he had faced reminded him of the challenges that still existed. He leaned back and closed his eyes, knowing the incident wasn't truly over yet. The flight landed in Florida with an air of tension that hadn't quite dissipated since the incident. As the passengers disembarked, many cast sympathetic glances at Jeremy, while a few whispered among themselves about the flight attendant's behavior. The viral potential of the videos taken during the flight loomed large, but Jeremy remained focused. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about ensuring that no one else had to experience what he did. Jeremy was met by a representative from the airline's corporate office who escorted him to a conference room in the terminal. Catherine was already there, seated at a long table with a visibly forced composure. Her earlier arrogance had been replaced with unease, though her defensiveness still lingered in her posture. Alongside her sat a few senior airline officials, including the head of customer relations and a legal advisor. The head of customer relations opened the meeting. "Officer Jeremy, we deeply regret the events that transpired on your flight. This is not the level of service or respect we strive to provide to our passengers. We've reviewed preliminary reports, and we'd like to hear your account of the incident." Jeremy nodded, his voice steady but firm as he recounted the series of events. Discovering his seat was taken, the dismissive attitude of Catherine, her refusal to resolve the matter appropriately, and the condescending comments she made. He didn't embellish the details, but the clarity in his words left no room for doubt. Catherine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, occasionally glancing at the officials as if seeking their support. When it was her turn to speak, she started defensively. "I didn't mean to disrespect him. There was a misunderstanding with the seating, and I was trying to manage the situation under pressure. Passengers were becoming unruly, and I had to make quick decisions." The head of customer relations raised a hand to interrupt her. "Catherine, we've seen the video footage from the passengers. Your actions and words were not consistent with the level of professionalism we expect. Could you explain why you made comments about his position and questioned his entitlement to the seat?" Catherine's face flushed and her words faltered. I wasn't trying to be offensive. It's just, I've had bad experiences with officers before. It wasn't personal." Jeremy's expression remained calm, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Bad experiences don't justify treating someone unfairly. I'm not here to represent everyone in uniform. I'm here as a passenger who deserved the same respect as anyone else in that cabin." Catherine hesitated, and for a moment, It seemed like she might continue her defensive stance. But then her shoulders slumped and she exhaled deeply. "I need to be honest," she said, her voice quieter now. "A few years ago, I had an encounter with a police officer who used his position to harass me. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, and I guess I haven't fully dealt with it. When I saw you in your uniform, it brought back those feelings, and I let them cloud my judgment. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth." The room fell silent. Jeremy studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured. "I'm sorry you went through that, and I can see how it could leave a lasting impact, but you have to understand that projecting those feelings onto someone else, especially in a professional setting, only perpetuates the cycle of harm. I've spent my life dealing with biases against me because of my skin color and my position. I don't think either of us wants to contribute to more of that." The senior officials exchanged glances, clearly processing the weight of the conversation. After a pause, the head of customer relations turned to Catherine. "Your actions on this flight were not acceptable, regardless of the personal struggles you faced. We're placing you on temporary leave, during which you'll be required to undergo sensitivity and professional conduct training. This is an opportunity to reflect and grow from this experience." Catherine nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand. Thank you for giving me the chance to improve." As the meeting concluded, Jeremy stood to leave. Catherine looked up at him and said softly, "I'm truly sorry. You didn't deserve that." Jeremy nodded. "Apologies matter, but what matters more is what we do to make things right. I hope this is a turning point for you." Walking out of the room, Jeremy felt a mix of emotions. The confrontation had been exhausting, but it had also brought to light deeper issues that needed addressing. This wasn't just about one flight attendant or one flight. It was about challenging the biases that affected so many aspects of life. As he stepped into the terminal, he reminded himself that the fight for fairness and respect was far from over. But moments like these were steps toward progress. The next few days were a whirlwind for Jeremy as the incident from the flight gained traction on social media. Videos recorded by passengers showed the exchange between him and Catherine, capturing her dismissive tone and the passengers' growing outrage. The airline, under mounting public pressure, issued a formal apology and announced measures to review its staff's conduct. Despite the attention, Jeremy remained focused on ensuring that the situation led to meaningful change rather than just a fleeting moment of outrage. Catherine, now on temporary leave, attended the sensitivity training mandated by the airline. The sessions forced her to confront not only her behavior, but also the prejudices she had harbored. During one exercise, she was asked to reflect on the assumptions she had made about Jeremy simply because he was in uniform and black. Her memories of past trauma surfaced, but for the first time she began to separate her personal pain from the actions of others who had nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, Jeremy was invited to meet with the airline's leadership to discuss broader changes. In the meeting, he emphasized the importance of accountability, not just for Catherine, but for the entire company. "This isn't just about one flight or one passenger," he said firmly. "It's about creating a culture where every customer, regardless of race, status, or background, is treated with respect." The airline's CEO agreed to implement new training programs for employees, focusing on implicit bias and conflict resolution. Jeremy also suggested forming a passenger advisory board to address concerns directly and ensure that incidents like his wouldn't be ignored or downplayed in the future. His ideas were met with enthusiasm, and plans for the changes were quickly set in motion. Several weeks later, Catherine requested a private meeting with Jeremy. Though skeptical, he agreed, hoping it could be an opportunity for genuine growth. When they met in a quiet office, Catherine's demeanor was markedly different from the defensive woman he had encountered on the plane. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. "I know I've apologized before, but I need to say it again. What I did was wrong, and I'm ashamed of how I acted." Jeremy studied her for a moment before responding. Acknowledging it is an important step, but what matters most is what you do moving forward. She nodded. The training opened my eyes to things I hadn't fully understood about myself. I let my past experiences control how I treated you, and that wasn't fair. I'm working to change, not just for my job, but for myself. I want to be better. Jeremy saw sincerity in her words, and though part of him still felt the sting of her initial behavior, he also believed in the power of redemption. "We all have room to grow," he said. "What's important is that you take this as a lesson and use it to treat others with the respect they deserve." The conversation ended on a hopeful note, with Catherine thanking him for his understanding and patience. As Jeremy left the office, he felt a sense of closure. While the incident had been painful and exhausting, it had sparked important conversations and changes that might prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. Months later, Jeremy boarded another flight, this time without any incidents. As he settled into his seat, he reflected on how much had transpired since that day. The changes at the airline were beginning to take effect, and Catherine had reportedly returned to work with a renewed commitment to professionalism. The memory of the passengers who had stood up for him still brought a sense of gratitude and hope. As the plane ascended into the sky, Jeremy looked out the window, thinking about the long road ahead in the fight against prejudice. He knew that change wouldn't come overnight, but he also knew that every step forward, no matter how small, was worth it. For now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing he had made a difference not just for himself, but for others who might one day walk the same path. This story reminds us how important it is to stand up for fairness and treat everyone with respect. What would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this.